Good evening. You're listening to Adrenaline Motorsports. I'm Fred Blanchard, your host, and we're fortunate enough to have a in-studio guest again, a very good friend of mine, Don Prieto. He was on the show here some weeks ago and talking about the various experiences in the early days of drag racing, and one of the things that I wanted to bring to light was one of the events that's coming up in another week or so. I guess it's next week, isn't it, Don?
Starts next Thursday.
Next Thursday. It's the Hot Rod Reunion, and I think it's on the 18th. Is that correct, or am I incorrect in that? Yeah, it would have to be the 18th, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
And one of the, of course, the features of the Hot Rod Reunion is primarily to show folks how drag racing was back in the early era of the sport, which was back in the late 50s, early 60s, when it came into being. And Don was kind enough to come back, and he had shed a lot of light on what was going on primarily down south, and what was part of drag racing in that area, which is the area of New Orleans and in some of the other southern states. And I had him here this evening to add to that. The point of that, adding to it, is that Don has gone over to the normal side of what goes on in drag racing, and created himself a very famous car for the Cackle Fest. And I don't know if you folks understand what the Cackle Fest is, but many of the cars that were of the era, some of which were recreated, not really race worthy, but I think the car that Don has, it probably could be, but primarily what it is a replica of a car that ran back in that era, and it had gone through various stages of evolution, but the name stayed the same. It was called the Hustler, and it was a combination of Frank Cannon and Art Chrisman, and several cars were built for the two, basically, and it basically ran in stages. You had Hustler 1, Hustler 2, and on down the line, and each one with a different history. And fortunately enough, Don took it upon himself to build a particular car, and very impressed. I must tell you that I was over there and admired the workmanship, and Don has traveled extensively for all the work and gone ahead and now the paint job really finished it off, and it's a beautiful piece, and it certainly resembles. Actually, it's a lot cleaner and nicer than what they used to be back in the day. He really made a showpiece out of it. He's probably going to put it in his living room at home probably later on. But
over restoration, that's called.
Well, it was over something, because I'm going to have to tell you, I'm pretty impressed. Don, thank you very much for being here with me. I really appreciate you coming in and taking the time to do this. Let's talk a little bit about what got you started on the project.
Well, let me say that the operative term in all of what you're talking about here is nostalgia. Waves of nostalgia come over you, and you do really crazy things. And that's how this all happened.
Oh, God, I got to tell you, from what I've seen out there, you're absolutely right.
One day, Pete Eastwood called me, and he said, "I've got this chassis here, and I'd like you to take a look at it." He says, "You work for Woody, and this is a Woody car, and we have an idea of where it came from and what have you." He says, "Come out and take a look at it." I said, "Okay." So I went to his place in Pasadena and looked at the chassis and agreed that he had done a yeoman's job of putting it back together the way it had been. What occurred was we started racing this car. It's called the Hustler 6, and it was the sixth in a line of dragsters that steadily improved with the breed. And Woody Gilmore was the chassis builder. Frank Cannon paid the bills and built the engine and drove it. And Pete Ogden was the guy that really welded the car together at Woody's, and he shared the driving chores. He did the racing. Cannon got in it and enjoyed the ride, so to speak. And we started off in December of 1965. I'm sorry, 1964. And we went to the Winter Nationals in Arizona, and it ran good. And then we went to Lyons, and it ran good. And we went up to Sacramento, and it ran good. And
this was the original car, though.
This is the real car.
Yeah, the real deal. Yeah, okay.
So then Jocko Johnson came along and convinced Woody that it had to have this streamlined body on it. So we spent the better part of a month.
Well, you got to shed a little light on Jocko and his.
No. That's a 3-hour show in itself, just to talk about things that Jocko did wrong, much less what he did right.
Yeah.
Anyway, we ran the car with the body on it, and the body was a detriment. So Woody got aggravated with it and threw it over the fence. And we ran the car without the body, qualified for the show, and the next morning turned it over and crashed it.
Oh, boy.
Due to track conditions. So
atmospheric conditions.
That was
too much air in the air. Is that what it was?
No. It was the racetrack had oil on it, and you couldn't see it.
I got you. Okay.
And so we turned it over and bent it all up, and we took the motor out and put it in Mooneyham's car because he had cracked a cylinder wall, and took the chassis home, took off all the trick parts, and cut the front end off and put it in the rafters. And that's how Pete found it. And we identified it by some tabs and stuff that were unique to that car. So the back half of the car is original, and the front half is the fabrication by Pete Eastwood. So I went out to his house and we looked at the car, and he told me what he wanted to do with it. And somehow he asked me if I'd like to be a partner, and I foolishly said, "Oh yeah, that'd be fun." so then what I did was I gave him half the money. That I could have bought the whole chassis or just half of it. I bought half of it, and I took it home and started assembling parts that were essentially identical to the way the car was to begin with. And about halfway through, he called me and he said, "Listen, we found the Mondeo and Mazzaboro Fiat Coupe." He said, "So I want out of the partnership. I'll either buy you out or you buy me out." Well, I was hooked at that point.
I would call it something else besides being hooked. There's another term for it, but go ahead.
Anyway, I bought the other half of the car from him, and I finished it up as the car that was run in at the Winter Nationals in '64. With the shorty body and all of that stuff. And I ran it, I cackled it for 2 or 3 years. And then I decided to do a kind of a tribute to the guys that were involved in that car. So I designed a body that was a combination of the original Hustler, which is Hustler 1 that Chrisman just recently sold, and Hustler 5, which was the last one that Cannon was the sole proprietor of. And so the body that you saw at the shop today was as a result of a design effort to try and incorporate all those things. And we're going to debut it at Art's shop on next Wednesday night.
How cool.
And that's how I got into that whole mess. I was part of the crew of the original car, and so it's kind of...
Well, the paint scheme, it brings back a memory in itself. That's the reason why I brought it up. And you mentioned it when I know that that was the colors that Art used and kind of thing. And that's
well, they had 3 cars together. They had Hustler 1, Hustler 2, which ended up in Mooneyham's hands. That was the square cage car. I don't know if you remember that. It had one of Tony Capena's Dodges or DeSoto's in it. I can't remember which.
Well, that car, I think, ended up that Earl Stone, who had the machine shop next to Cannon's place, he ended up with that car. And it was a short wheelbase car, kind of like a Scotty Finn car in a way, but you're right, the square tubing is what... In fact, that car Dale and I got a hold of, because Amos was trying to run it there for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's in Texas in Mooneyham livery at this point.
Really?
Yeah.
So it still survived, huh?
Yes, and it's the original car. It's not one that anybody had spent any time and effort on. They just cleaned it up, painted what needed to be painted, and the engine with them funny-looking headers.
Well, I'm ashamed to tell you what we did with it before you guys got it. We cut the front of the car off, and we were going to extend it because it didn't handle worth you know what. So, but no, anyway.